So the poem that we're going to be looking at today is called Now That April's Here. It's a poem that's Chris Wallace-Crabbe has dedicated for Peter Steele. This poem was written whilst Chris Wallace-Crabbe was in Europe at the time. So he was experiencing this alternate April season. He was experiencing April as spring rather than autumn as he would down here in the southern hemisphere. And it's set in Italy, so the imagery that he uses is evoking some of the landscapes that are really common in images of Italy. So a very different interpretation of April for him as a writer, and he tries to capture it in this poem. It's not a very long poem. We can see structurally he alternates with lines, and we'll get into that as we're going through. But we'll just work through the poem first and then start looking at some of the imagery that he's evoking throughout it. So as I mentioned, Chris Wallace-Crabbe was in Europe at the time. So he experiences April as part of spring. Very, very different. And he begins the poem saying, "Where monotone was, the tips and fledges are uncurling, pasteled, pea-green, purplish pink. Bannerets, dwarf opening brollies of ardent verdure, change the profiles of shrub or branch. The hills' faces are mopping and mowing with growth. There is a hunger for difference in the air, new attitudes to sunshine, goodness of earth rustling to get up and go. The stillness is crammed with tiny, excitable statements held on juicy, short stems. Listen, the almond has something white to announce. The cherry's pink has green verbs, all active, and blackbirds are doing their best to keep up." So if we look just at this first half, he really sets the scene for where he is and what it is that he's experiencing and seeing. And so if we go back to the start, when he's talking about where monotone was, so if we think about monotone, we're thinking about grey and white. And he's, representing winter or the coming of winter. And here he's saying where winter once was, now the tips and fledges are uncurling. So it's this winter progressing through to spring. And we've got the fledges to this new life. And you can picture some of the plants unfurling, uncurling as they open up. We also see that, he's got a lot of colour coming up, and there's a warmth to the colour that's being described in all of these different pastel, pea green, purplish pink. So he's also trying to capture the warmth of the season, and he's very affectionate of it. He is enjoying the fact that spring is coming, which is often the case after you've had a very long winter. What we see also with this is the way that he's chosen to describe it. So he's using personification or pathetic fallacy, if you wish to look at it that way, where the landscapes, the environment itself is opening up. So in this case, the hills' faces are mopping and mowing with growth. And, this assonance here just has that sense of warmth to it as he's trying to describe what it is that's happening. And even as it progresses, we see that the landscape is treated almost as a human. there is a hunger for difference in the air. It's the environment. This is that pathetic fallacy coming into play. Wanting change, new attitudes to sunshine, goodness of earth rustling to get up and go. Whilst it's sort of describing the landscape, this can also, capture the attitudes of the people at the time as well. Yeah. As it progresses, we see, again, some of the specific terminology that he uses. The stillness is crammed with tiny, excitable statements held on juicy short stems. Listen, the almond has something white to announce. The cherry's pink has green verbs, all actives, and blackbirds are doing their best to keep up. So he continues to use this personification to bring nature to life. Particularly with the focus on spoken or speech or verbs or words that he's using here. Almost as if the environment itself was sort of starting to wake up and speak out to the world. So he sets up the first half of this poem up in that fashion, highlighting all of those things and describing what it is that he sees. And then we move to the second half of the poem, and it has a change in direction. So he begins, at home, folded in slow, continuous seasons, their blue-grey miles, we cannot guess at all this Vivaldesque agitation of April. Like the tense buzz of political parties that split, proliferate and fray, the flowers come. Our stock of abstract ideas is exploding like a bomb, confusion firing the mind. The shoes of promise are crunching around the bends on gravel paths, slow, quick, slow, and a couple of skips. Look at that cloud in the shape of a dud guitar. Berenson, Machiavelli, obstinate Galileo, these are your chatterbox hill slopes, feathered and all a jump with continuous growing, shapes of republics living or dead, carrying their carnival colours brilliantly through my head. So he starts, with this reference to home, and for him, at home is back here in Australia, folded in slow, continuous seasons, their blue-grey miles. We cannot guess all this Vivaldesque agitation of April. So he's got a few different images that he's trying to evoke here. The blue-grey miles evokes, the image of Australian bush, eucalypt in particular. And the continuous seasons, in a sense, also highlights, particularly down in the southern states of Australia, how we don't necessarily get very distinct seasons as they do in Europe. Our summers are never as continuously hot as a European summer, nor are our winters. And he talks about how we, as the Australian people, would find this European spring so very, very foreign. We cannot guess because of the fact that it is so different. He also evokes, again, a musical illusion here, very common, as we've seen in quite a few of the different poems by Chris Wallace-Crabbe. So Vivaldi, Italian Baroque composer, so he's evoking this musical idea. One of the really key tropes of Baroque music is counterpoint. So this continuous movement of ideas in the music, and is using that and alluding to how the environment in April, in spring, is continuously bubbling along, continuously coming to life. There's also, the tangential allusion to Vivaldi's four seasons, so his composition of the different seasons, including spring. So a couple of different allusions that he's included in here. So we'll just make a note of that. And then we get this next little part, which almost shifts to like a human, less romantic commentary in this next section, where suddenly he becomes a little bit more focused on, what's happening at home, and how nature can compare to the human experience. So he says, like the tense buzz of political parties that split, proliferate, and fray, the flowers come. Our stock of abstract ideas is exploding like a bomb, confusion firing the mind. So a very far less romantic tone, in a sense, to what he was talking about a little bit earlier on. It's far more modern. And interestingly, using some of the images, particularly of like flowers blooming and things coming to life, but using terminology that is a bit more abrupt. So this split, proliferate, and fray is reminiscent of what happens in nature, but it carries with it that darker tone, that slightly more critical tone. Same with the exploding like a bomb. So the use of the simile here is very dark and a bit more harsh in contrast to some of the other imagery that's been conveyed thus far. And it continues on. This is one of the first instances where we have this example of enjambment. Where he's deliberately continuing the sentence at the start of the next verse. The shoes of promise are crunching round the bends on gravel paths. Slow, quick, slow, and a couple of skips. Look at that cloud in the shape of a dud guitar. The enjambment, the fact that he's chosen to end here with this idea of promise, carries with it again a sense of hope, which we find in quite a lot of the poetry by Wallace-Crabbe. And he almost tries to counteract this verse about political parties by then including a far lighter, humorous tone that includes this, look at that cloud in the shape of a dud guitar, this humorous little quip that's just added in to try and bring focus back on the beauty of the environment, which is actually where he ends. And to Italy and where he is are really clear in this very first line of the last verse. These are your chatterbox hill slopes, feathered and all a jump with continuous growing. shapes of republics, living or dead. So he's really contemplating the history of the landscape. And he ends, again, really, really brightly and really hopefully, carrying their carnival colours brilliantly through my head. So using the environment and what it's evoking, and all of these different thoughts that are coming about for him. He's having all of these ideas about politics. He references Machiavelli here towards the end, but also, artistry and Galileo. These provide, the scope for him to search for that meaning that he's always looking for. And for him, it seems as though meaning can be found in nature. He's looking around the environment and he's seeing references to a whole range of different things in his world. These last lines, the carnival colours, alludes to the Carnival, which is really common in Europe. It's the beginning of Lent, but also signifying, the start of spring. But it's also, a very positive and colourful ending to his little contemplation about April and spring in Europe. So that is the poem Now That April's Here by Chris Wallace-Crabbe.